Please welcome to the stage Giuliano Bossi and Evan Huus.
Hi everyone, my name is Evan Huus and I'm a development manager on the platform team.
And my name is Giuliano Bossi, Director of Engineering on the platform team. Today we're going to talk to you about why choosing GraphQL will significantly improve your ability to write scalable and performant apps while unlocking new features that were not available before. We will spend the first part of the next 30 minutes talking about the state of GraphQL at Shopify, where we came from and how it evolved. We will then focus on new opportunities that are available today, including a couple of demos of them in action. And finally, we will discuss what lies ahead. Let's look at the state of GraphQL. First of all, for those of you who are not too familiar with GraphQL, let's recap its main concepts. Essentially, GraphQL is a language and a specification that allows you to define APIs in terms of queries and mutations. Those operations are modeled after the domain and can be expressed by composing a graph of different fields in a single operation. Last but not least, those fields are typed and respond to a well-defined schema that can be explored by API users. This is an example of a query taken from our documentation. As you can see, it queries for a specific product by its ID, and it extracts two fields, title and description. And this is the corresponding response with the requested fields and related values. This is instead an example of a mutation, taken also from our documentation. It specifies an operation, product delete, and it specifies the ID of the product to delete in input, while requesting to return the deleted ID in output. And this is the corresponding response. The internet is full of articles explaining the advantages of GraphQL over REST, so we won't get into a detailed analysis here. We just want to remind you what led us to GraphQL and why you should leverage it. First of all, GraphQL allows you to design interactions with the API that simply lead to fewer round trips. This, combined with requests that can express a graph of different fields, means that your application uses the API more efficiently and is overall more performant. Secondly, by designing an API that leverages GraphQL, you're not bound to a worldview based on resources and the usual REST verbs associated with that. This ultimately leads to a better, more intuitive domain model and more efficient operations once again. Last but not least, GraphQL offers strong typing and related validation, conducive to a development model that is faster and less prone to errors. Now, these advantages may sound a bit abstract, but they translate into real-world benefits. So consider, for example, the experience of one of our Plus agency partners. The folks at Blue Badger were facing a problem with one of their apps in terms of their performance. As you can see, it was taking between 30 and 90 minutes to execute. They then refactored their code to leverage GraphQL, and it reduced the execution time to between 3 and 4 minutes. Switching to GraphQL made them an order of magnitude faster. Now, of course, not every use case is going to see improvements this drastic, but we're really excited to help you discover as many of these wins as possible. Today, GraphQL powers all service-to-service communication within Shopify's own infrastructure. It's also how all internal APIs, or all internal clients consume APIs, including our web and mobile-based admins, point of sale, sales channels, and so on. We trust it implicitly for our own workloads, and it is one of the key factors that has allowed us to continue to scale. Just to give you a couple of significant quantities, we average 122 million GraphQL calls per day in April, including both third-party and first-party apps. And third-party apps alone queried or mutated data of about 25,000 distinct shops per day. We consider GraphQL to be as stable as the REST Admin API. It is the primary API that powers all Shopify-built applications and unlocks the full potential of the underlying commerce platform. REST is very popular and well supported, But GraphQL is our API of choice at Shopify, and we want it to be yours as well. For these reasons, the GraphQL Admin API graduated out of beta in November 2018. This should not be too surprising given how Shopify started to experiment with GraphQL as soon as Facebook published the initial specification. We had a very specific problem to solve. We needed our mobile app to be fast and responsive without duplicating logic with the web admin. GraphQL solved that problem for us, and we were able to efficiently query and mutate data based on the right granularity for the user interaction. After that, GraphQL offered us a way, the best way, to provide a cohesive customer-facing API that replaced previous REST-based attempts and allowed us to write custom storefronts in JavaScript very easily. Storefront GraphQL API was born. At that point, we were fully invested in GraphQL and decided to open up the Admin API for public consumption last year. Originally, it was in beta, given some of the gaps that existed at the time, but now most of these gaps have been filled, which we will discuss later. And now, we're standing here in front of you to recommend that you too move to GraphQL. And to prove that we are committing to this GraphQL first future, we have updated our libraries to support GraphQL. GraphQL is now fully supported within our Shopify API Ruby gem and our Python library. We're also working with the community and the respective maintainers to get all third-party libraries to be fully GraphQL enabled. For example, PHP Shopify and Shopify Sharp have already been updated. So if you're using any one of these libraries, then the first step has already been done for you. And of course, if you prefer, you can still choose to use any HTTP client library of your choice. In addition to that, the Shopify app command line interface tool that we are releasing here supports GraphQL out of the box. This means that the tool generates code that uses GraphQL and maps the schema for you. Our colleague Tyler Ball will give you an overview about this new tool tomorrow in a lightning talk, and we recommend you check it out. And now Evan will tell you about some of the new exciting opportunities that we are unlocking today.
Thanks, Giuliano. Since announcing the GraphQL Admin API, we've been busy filling in the gaps that were present a year ago. For example, as we'll show you in a bit, we've now ported the Billing API to GraphQL. Note that this does not mean just plainly translating every endpoint into an equivalent GraphQL query. GraphQL offers a new approach that we took advantage of to rethink the surface area of the API. We're happy to announce that with the July 1st, 2019 version, almost all core use cases that REST allows are now available in GraphQL. Beyond existing behavior, GraphQL also allows us to build new APIs in a way that wasn't practical before. In a moment, we'll show you a few examples of some of the new things we've built. But first, let's talk about the Billing API. Many of you have asked us to port the RESTful Billing API to GraphQL, and we're happy to announce that it's done. You can now leverage the entire surface area of the Billing API in GraphQL. Here, you can see a simple example of querying for a subscription by ID and returning status and name. And now, we're going to show you a demo of this new API in action, running inside the handy GraphQL application. GraphQL is an app that you can install on any of your development shops that lets you make GraphQL queries and mutations with features like autocomplete, syntax highlighting, and inline documentation. It's a great way to write and test out new queries for your production apps. For the purposes of the demo, we've already installed GraphQL on our shop, so we're going to open it up and use it with the new Billing API to charge our merchant for a simple one-time purchase. Let's get started. As mentioned, this demo will be running in the same GraphQL application that's available to everyone. The one thing I do want to point out up front is that we've set the version dropdown at the top to unstable, since that's where the new Billing API was first available. Of course, now that it's been announced, it's also available in the release candidate for the upcoming July version that will be stable as of July 1st. Before we make any changes to our billing, let's first ensure there are no unexpected purchases already present. So we'll fill in a query to list one-time purchases for the app and ask for the name, status, and price of each one. We run this, and you can see that we get no edges back. No purchases have been made yet. Now let's actually pretend to buy something. For the sake of the demo, let's say the merchant has just bought a new template for their emails for a nice round $100 American. We fill in a pretty standard mutation and give it the name, the price, and the return URL, and of course ask for it to return the new fields we're interested in. Later this afternoon, there will be a workshop on the Billing API that will go into much more detail, but I want to quickly cover this flow so that you can follow along. In this mutation, the app receives a confirmation URL where the merchant will approve the purchase, and provides a return URL where the merchant will finish their flow. Here, we've just used Google since we don't actually have an app to redirect to. Typically, the mutation will run, the app will redirect the merchant to the confirmation URL, the merchant approves the purchase, and finally Shopify redirects them back to the return URL where the app can provide them with the thing that they just purchased. Okay, our mutation's all ready to go. We run this, and you can see we get back no errors, which is a good thing, the confirmation URL that I mentioned, and of course the name and status of the purchase, which is currently pending. Typically, we redirect the merchant at this point, but for the sake of the demo, we'll just copy the confirmation URL and open it in another tab. This opens a Shopify-controlled page in the merchant's admin where they can see the details of the item they're about to purchase. Before we approve this purchase, though, let's quickly go back and rerun our initial query. You can see we now have one purchase listed, with the name and price we provided in the pending state. This is the same information we got back from the mutation payload. I just want to demonstrate that the purchase has been properly persisted and comes back in the right state. All right, let's go back to the confirmation screen and press that button to approve the purchase. You can see we get redirected to Google, which is the address we provided in our mutation. You'll also note that the ID of the purchase is passed as a parameter in the URL, so your app can tell which purchase was just approved. At this point, the merchant has approved the purchase, so we're technically all done, but I want to rerun that initial query one more time. You can see we get back the same information as before, but now that the merchant has approved the purchase, the status is listed as active. And that's the Billing API. Now, we've just highlighted the Billing API, but that's only one example of functionality that's being added to GraphQL. It's also worth noting the new Discounts API, which lets you manage automatic and code-based discounts. This includes the buy X get Y type, and means you no longer have to deal with how the underlying price rules are implemented. Another one you might be interested in is the Delivery Profiles API. This replaces the old Shipping Zones API with a much more powerful and flexible model for managing shipping rates across locations and products. And finally, our GraphQL API is currency aware, letting you handle multi-currency shops with ease. All of this is just some of the work we've been doing to make sure GraphQL covers the same functionality as our existing APIs. If you have any questions or concerns with these specific APIs, please take the opportunity to book office hours with our API support team, or visit the developer drop-in area on the first floor. Now, all of that was filling in the gaps, but we're also excited to show you some of the new things we've been building, like the new Bulk API. We know that querying large quantities of data is a significant source of pain, especially for those of you integrating with ERPs or other third-party systems. The Bulk API is a GraphQL-specific technology that solves this problem efficiently, both in terms of raw performance, but also in terms of just how much code you have to write. It's currently in private beta while we work out some of the kinks, but will be production ready later this year. The design of the Bulk API lets you specify a normal GraphQL query. For example, a query for products. However, instead of immediately receiving back a single page of data, the request executes in the background, and when it's done, you get back all of the data matching your query. No more cursors, no more messy pagination, no more rate limiting. Okay, now let's see the Bulk API in action. As before, this demo will run in the graphical app with the unstable API version, and of course, we've already granted ourselves access to the beta. We're going to start by running a pretty basic query for a page of products, since that's how you would have gotten this information prior to the existence of the Bulk API. We're only asking for 2 here so that it fits on the screen, but of course normally you could ask for up to 250. We run this query, and you can see we get back our 2 products, and an indication that there are more products for us to fetch, and of course the cursors we'd need to fetch them. Now, you can use this approach to fetch all of your products, going through them 1 page at a time, but it involves making a lot of requests and risks getting throttled if you have thousands or millions of products. It also becomes quite difficult to manage if you're dealing with pages of a nested type, such as product variant. Instead, let's make this query using the Bulk API. The Bulk API is a standard mutation which takes an entire query as its input and returns a job. You'll be able to see the shape of it here. There you go. All we have to do is copy the query we were running and move it into the input argument. The Bulk API will paginate through it automatically on Shopify servers and collect the results. Now, the one minor difference between a regular query and a bulk query is that we can get rid of the first argument to our product list, since, of course, we're now asking for all the products on the shop, not just the first 2. This is ready to go, so we can run it, and you see we get back the ID and status of the job that's now running in the background. It will do all the hard work of iterating through the products on the shop and collecting the results into a file for us to download. Our demo shop doesn't actually have that many products, so the job is probably already finished. We can take the ID of the job we got back and use it to query for that same job again. And we'll get back, the job is now status completed, and of course we have a URL, a link to a private file containing all of our results ready to go. As I mentioned, this is only available in private beta while we work out some of the kinks, but we're hoping to make it more widely available as soon as it's ready. And that's the Bulk API. Now, the Bulk API is available only in GraphQL, and it's not the only one. Several of the new features announced here at Unite are available exclusively in our GraphQL API. And one of the most important of these is the Order Editing API, which lets you make changes to orders after they've been placed. This enables many extended use cases for personalization, customer relationship management, and buyer control. Also available only in GraphQL is the Media API, necessary for supporting videos and 3D models. Be sure to check out Dan Meeking's talk on this API tomorrow. And of course, finally, GraphQL also includes support for private meta fields, letting you associate extra data with products and orders that can only be accessed by the app which stored it. Surgeon Payek is giving a lightning talk on this API tomorrow afternoon. As before, if you have any questions or concerns with these specific APIs, please take the opportunity to book office hours with our API support staff or visit the developer drop-in area on the first floor. And now, Giuliano will tell you what lies ahead for GraphQL at Shopify.
Our commitment to a world-class API is definitive. We believe that GraphQL is the future of APIs at Shopify and beyond. Furthermore, we're so invested in GraphQL that we have decided to join its foundation. JML, our CTO, is on the GraphQL Foundation Governing Board, and Evan attends the monthly working group meetings. We're always looking for more opportunities to give back. The future is bright, as you can imagine, and the future is GraphQL. Increasingly, we will be releasing new APIs in GraphQL only. So we highly recommend that you look into GraphQL, experiment with it, invest in it. We encourage you to embrace GraphQL in order to take advantage of the opportunity that these new APIs represent. While we do encourage you to move to GraphQL, we also guarantee you that the REST Admin API is going nowhere. We will likely not develop new RESTful APIs, but we will maintain the existing ones for the foreseeable future. These APIs today power most of your businesses, and it's critical for us to keep them in good standing. This also means that the existing APIs will receive changes to stay on par with GraphQL, even while new APIs may be GraphQL only. All right, we're just about done.
Yes, we are, and we've covered a lot of material today. This talk has given you information about our GraphQL Admin APIs and the opportunity they represent for you. We understand that the transition from a REST-based worldview to one based on GraphQL is a little bit of work. We've made that journey ourselves, and we know what it means. But we encourage you to use our experience and embrace GraphQL. Furthermore, we're committed to giving you a great developer experience through updated documentation, discoverable schemas, the graphical playground app, updated libraries, and new tools. We're developers like you. We get excited when a new opportunity is on the horizon, but we're also cautious of things that might not be ready. GraphQL is ready, and the value proposition that it represents is too compelling to ignore. GraphQL gives you objective and significant advantages, and it's up to you to leverage them. When you're ready to take advantage of the benefits of GraphQL, you've chosen an excellent partner in Shopify. If you want to learn more about GraphQL, we suggest you check out these resources. There's the main site, which has a ton of great information on GraphQL generally. There's our GraphQL Learning Kit, which will walk you through using and exploring it at Shopify. And of course, there's our full reference documentation that you can browse at any time. Thank you for listening. And now we're ready to take questions.
So Colin asks, will you have a GraphQL for partners to replace the app, common separated value app, and billing history email extracts? So we do have, as you can imagine, an internal API, GraphQL API for the partners app. We don't really have any plan to open it up for now, but yeah, come talk to us later, and we can see what you have in mind and how we can help you more. Anonymous asks, how to handle timeout cases?
Timeout cases, so generally, timeout cases are our problem, not your problem. But if you're making requests that are timing out instead of getting throttled or getting an appropriate error response back, please also come talk to us afterwards, and we'll help you get to the bottom of that, because that shouldn't generally be happening.
Okay. Anuj asks, is delivery profile API allow us to manipulate delivery prices using API real time? If we want to add markup or want to reduce delivery charges for order, for example. We are not probably the experts on the delivery API and the other APIs that we discussed today. I really recommend you to go to the app support team and speak with them. They can definitely help you look more into these cases. Yeah, that's the best answer I have for you. Jay asks, mobile buy SDK will support these new GraphQL APIs?
The the what SDK?
Mobile buy.
Yes, the mobile buy SDK already is already built on GraphQL, I believe. You just don't even notice.
Yeah, I think so.
That down.
Anonymous asks, oh, this is juicy. Are the rate limit query costs likely to stay the same?
So the throttle in GraphQL and the rate limiting in GraphQL is something that we are constantly reevaluating. Our evaluation of this last year led us to start developing the Bulk API, which we announced today, because we realized that that there are a lot of use cases where a real-time API is simply not the right design to begin with, whether it's REST or GraphQL or SOAP or any other technology you care to name. And so we've developed the Bulk API to address a lot of those data-heavy use cases, and we will continue to evaluate how the API is being used and what people are actually trying to accomplish with it, and adjust the rate limits accordingly.
Alex is asking, how do you know a bulk job is done? Polling, webhooks?
The Bulk API, as it's currently designed, will be polling. We are also looking into webhooks and other delivery methods. That's one of the reasons it's in private beta.
Amos is asking, why is setting inventory level not possible on GraphQL, but is possible on REST? This really depends. There are some cases where we actually change the surface area of the API. This might be one of them, but once again, I would encourage you to speak with the API support team, book some time with them, and they can get to the bottom of this and maybe help you to see how to get to the same result, but through a different angle of attack, so to speak. Chris is asking, can you explain how GraphQL helps overcoming rate limit issues? More efficient GraphQL calls will make this worse, not better, right?
So every use case is a little bit different. The transition from REST to GraphQL is not, as I mentioned, talking about the billing API, it's not always one-to-one. We took the opportunity to make the API better and simpler when we transition things to GraphQL. So one good example of a case where it becomes a lot better and the rate limit issue basically goes away is with meta fields. Previously, if you wanted to get a meta field, that was a request in REST. So if you have if you want to get products and you want to get 5 specific meta fields on each product, that was 5 requests per product in REST. That is now 1 request in GraphQL. You can fill in all of that meta field information in your GraphQL query. It's a single request. It costs very little, relatively speaking, to execute, and so you can make way more of those requests than you could ever before. Again, every use case is different. Some use cases will work out roughly one-to-one with REST, but I would be very surprised if there were any that were substantially worse.
And there was also a great blog post we published last week, I believe, with the experience of another partner that was having actually rate limits issues. And I believe is in the room, possibly, Future Technologies. Anyway, they described their journey through GraphQL and how that really improved their life and basically enabled better behavior, more healthy behavior for the app in terms of rate limiting and using the platform.
I think we're just about out of time. So
one more?
No more.
All right. We're done. Well, catch us later. Okay.
Yes.
Cheers.
Thank you.